Hey everyone, and welcome to The Year Was, the podcast all about today that gives you just enough information to effectively be that guy at the party, causing all your friends to question, hey, who invited you? Like, seriously, why are you here? I'm your host, Michael Montalvo, and for the next few minutes we will swim through the river of time to find out what makes it a truly unique. On this episode, we examine the events that occurred September 23rd. The first memory I have of playing Nintendo was at my uncle's. He had gotten a Super Nintendo from somewhere and was playing A Link to the Past, which I asked to try and was told no. I remember playing Duck Hunt and Mario, and then I remember playing Star Fox at a friend's house, and finally, I remember Christmas morning when we got a Nintendo 64. With it, games like Donkey Kong Country, Ocarina of Time, Perfect Dark, multiple Star Wars games, and of course GoldenEye, opened the world to a new and exciting digital adventure. I didn't know much about the company other than it was a gaming company. They made Game Boys, and like many, assumed that they had come around only in the latter half of the 20th century. And that's true, to a point. That brings us to the topic of today's episode. The year was 1889, and on this day, September 23rd, the Japanese company Nintendo Koppai was founded. Nintendo? 1889? What sorcery is this, you say? Well, it's true. Nintendo began its life as a playing card company that manufactured the game Hanafuda. Yes, I know, I'm probably going to be mispronouncing. Up until then, because of illegal gambling, the Japanese had actually banned all card games. The way they got around it was that hanafuda is a game that was developed using illustrations instead of numbers. And so because of this technicality, developer Fusajiro Yamauchi was able to sell the cards. Back then, however, there was no Kickstarter, and so there was really no way to market a new game to a large audience quickly. Needless to say, the game was not an immediate success. The cards were all handmade, hand-painted, and with the extra help required to make these pricey cards, sales were not great. Yamauchi came up with the idea of making a cheaper version of a lower quality and sold them under the name Tengu. Apparently this was no accident. Tengu characters had a long nose, and the Japanese word for nose is pronounced the same as the Japanese word for flower. Hana as in hanafuda. So, why the name? The Kotaku article I read says, according to the history of Nintendo, those visiting the pleasure quarters of Osaka and Kyoto would rub their noses as a sign that they were looking for gambling games. For card players, ten meant tengu, which meant gambling. Because of this, early hanafuda cards were associated with criminals and criminal activity. The illegal gambling part of it. In 1933, the company was incorporated as Yamauchi Nintendo Unlimited, and in 1949, after the sales of foreign playing cards resumed, it established Marufuku Co. Limited, which was the sales and marketing part of the company. It was also in 1949 that Yamauchi's great-grandson Hiroshi took over the company, all at the age of 22. What's notable about this is that once in power, he fired all the remaining members of the Yamauchi family in order to send a clear message about who was in charge. He would go on to oversee the expansion of the company and would eventually make the move from playing cards to a plethora of business ventures which would ultimately fail until the company moved into electronic games. Nintendo would first try their hand at electronics with a children's walkie-talkie set that it made in a partnership with Sharp, a partnership that has lasted to this day. This set was not made in large quantities, and that makes it one of Nintendo's rare items. In 1952, Nintendo changed its name again to the Nintendo Playing Card Company, then in 1961 to its current name of Nintendo Co. Limited. In 1969, nice, Nintendo produced the Love Tester, the first of their products to use real electronic components. This is when we start just naming accomplishments for Nintendo. 5 years later, in 1974, after securing the rights to distribute the Magnavox Odyssey video game system, Nintendo made its first move into the video game industry. Then, in 1977, they began to make their own, not the NES, as you might think, but 4 separate color game consoles that were each loaded with 1 game apiece. The Game & Watch handheld consoles came next from 1980 to 1991, and was the earliest Nintendo product to see a widespread success. But it was in 1981 that the world was forever changed by Nintendo with the introduction of Donkey Kong. Did you know that Shigeru Miyamoto, who designed the game along with Super Mario, is not allowed to bicycle to work because he's so important to Nintendo? I found that out from this article I read. This brings us to 1983 and the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, or Famicom as it was initially known. The console revitalized the gaming industry along with the Game Boy, released in 1989, 100 years after the company was founded. Not to the day, just to the year. And from there, they have become a giant in the gaming industry. That's the story of Nintendo in a turtle shell. Mario Kart. Now, obviously, there's more to the story, and if there is any interest in it, I will line up a panel of gamers and we can discuss the various Nintendo consoles and their impact on gaming. Here's some fun trivia for you, though. No one's really sure what the name Nintendo stands for. I know what you're saying. The Year Was podcast, Nintendo stands for Leave Luck to Heaven, or you might say it means to leave one's fortune in the hands of fate. And that makes sense from a gambling perspective, as Tengu meant gambling and makes up the middle part of the name, Nintendo. In the same Kotaku article, Nintendo probably doesn't mean what you think it means. Do means sanctuary, and nin means let someone do. So it could be interpreted as the temple of free hanafuda. However, nin can also mean duty or obligation. Some experts believe that nin comes from ninkyo, which means chivalry, and that it has connections to the Yakuza. That's a whole thing, but I don't want to get into it here. Even Hiroshi Yamauchi admitted he doesn't know what it stands for, only saying that the phrase, leave luck to heaven, was plausible. Also, on the Encyclopedia Trivia website, it states that the first Nintendo console had over 2 times the computing power as the first lunar lander. So that's pretty cool. And that's going to do it for us today. If you like this podcast and want to hear more, give us a rate and a review. That helps me out and helps steer this in a direction that is hopefully good for all. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can find the Year Was audio version on your podcast app of choice. You can find me on social media and at YouTube at the Apple Cider Club. And as always, I want to thank the Tim Kreitz Band for our musical theme. And thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.